Question 1. Research into network performance monitoring reveals a consistent pattern of latency spikes on a critical server hosting sensitive customer data. As a certified security analyst, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to address this issue, considering the organization's adherence to U.S. regulatory frameworks governing data protection and privacy? Option A. Wait for the latency spikes to cause a noticeable service outage before initiating any investigation or reporting the issue. Option B. Immediately implement network traffic shaping to reduce latency, assuming that any performance issue is solely a technical problem unrelated to security. Option C. Escalate all latency spike alerts directly to the Chief Information Security Officer without any initial analysis to ensure immediate awareness. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to determine the potential impact of latency spikes on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of sensitive customer data, and evaluate any associated compliance implications under relevant U.S. regulations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to determine the potential impact of latency spikes on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of sensitive customer data, and evaluate any associated compliance implications under relevant U.S. regulations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because network performance monitoring is critical for maintaining service availability and security, directly impacting an organization's ability to comply with regulatory obligations. A failure in performance can lead to service disruptions, data integrity issues, and potential breaches, all of which carry significant regulatory and ethical implications. The analyst must balance proactive monitoring with reactive incident response, ensuring that any identified performance degradation is assessed for its potential impact on security posture and regulatory adherence. Careful judgment is required to prioritize actions and communicate findings effectively to stakeholders. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies the potential impact of network performance degradation on security controls and regulatory compliance. This approach aligns with the principles of proactive risk management mandated by various cybersecurity frameworks and regulations. By assessing the likelihood and impact of performance issues on sensitive data, system availability, and the ability to meet reporting requirements, the analyst can prioritize mitigation efforts and allocate resources effectively. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect organizational assets and ensure compliance with legal and regulatory standards. An approach that focuses solely on optimizing network speed without considering the security implications is professionally unacceptable. This oversight fails to acknowledge that performance issues can be symptomatic of underlying security threats, such as denial of service attacks or unauthorized traffic. Ignoring these potential security risks could lead to a breach or compliance violation, violating the analyst's duty to maintain a secure environment. Another incorrect approach is to only react to performance alerts after they have significantly impacted services. This reactive stance neglects the proactive monitoring and early detection requirements inherent in robust security practices. It fails to identify subtle performance degradations that could indicate a developing security incident or a gradual erosion of compliance controls, thereby increasing the organization's risk exposure. Finally, an approach that involves immediately escalating all performance alerts to senior management without initial analysis is inefficient and can lead to alert fatigue. While transparency is important, a preliminary risk assessment is necessary to filter out minor issues and focus attention on those that pose a genuine threat to security or compliance. This lack of initial triage can overwhelm management and dilute the impact of critical alerts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the organization's risk appetite and regulatory landscape. When faced with network performance monitoring data, the first step is to contextualize the observed performance against established baselines and security policies. Subsequently, a risk assessment should be conducted to determine the potential impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, as well as the ability to meet compliance obligations. This assessment should guide the prioritization of investigation and remediation efforts, ensuring that actions are proportionate to the identified risks and aligned with regulatory requirements. Question 2. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of identified vulnerabilities across the organization's network infrastructure over the past quarter. While the total count has risen, the average severity rating of these vulnerabilities has remained moderate. The IT operations team has expressed concerns about the potential disruption to critical business services if immediate, widespread patching is implemented without careful planning. As a certified security analyst, CSA, what is the most appropriate course of action to manage this situation effectively and compliantly? Option A. Immediately initiate a mass patching campaign to address all identified vulnerabilities, regardless of severity, to demonstrate a proactive security posture and minimize the overall vulnerability count. Option B. Defer all patching activities for critical systems until the end of the fiscal year to avoid impacting current quarter performance metrics and to allow for a more comprehensive review of the entire security landscape. Option C. Focus on addressing only the vulnerabilities that are easiest and quickest to patch, as this will show the most immediate improvement in the vulnerability metrics and reduce the overall number of open tickets. Option D. Prioritize remediation efforts based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the exploitability, potential business impact, and regulatory implications of each vulnerability, coordinating with IT operations to schedule patching during planned maintenance windows where possible. The correct answer is D. Prioritize remediation efforts based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the exploitability, potential business impact, and regulatory implications of each vulnerability, coordinating with IT operations to schedule patching during planned maintenance windows where possible. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity, balancing the urgency of addressing critical vulnerabilities with the operational realities of a business. The certified security analyst, CSA, must demonstrate an understanding of not just technical remediation, but also the regulatory and ethical obligations that govern such processes. The professional challenge lies in prioritizing actions that effectively mitigate risk while adhering to established frameworks, ensuring that the organization remains compliant and secure. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreaction and complacency, which could lead to significant security incidents or regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a systematic process of vulnerability assessment, risk analysis, and prioritized remediation, informed by the organization's specific threat landscape and regulatory environment. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and prudent risk management expected of a security professional. Specifically, it emphasizes understanding the business impact of vulnerabilities and aligning remediation efforts with those impacts, a core tenet of effective security governance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the number of vulnerabilities, without considering their severity or potential impact, fails to meet the organization's risk management responsibilities. This can lead to misallocation of resources, addressing low-risk issues while leaving critical ones unpatched, thereby increasing the likelihood of a successful attack and potential regulatory noncompliance. Another incorrect approach that delays remediation of critical vulnerabilities due to perceived operational inconvenience demonstrates a failure to prioritize security and protect organizational assets. This can result in significant financial and reputational damage, and potentially violate regulatory requirements that mandate timely patching of known vulnerabilities. A further incorrect approach that relies on automated tools without human oversight or contextual analysis can lead to false positives or missed critical threats. This lack of nuanced understanding can result in ineffective remediation strategies and a false sense of security, leaving the organization exposed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the organization's assets, threat model, and regulatory obligations. This framework should then guide the implementation of a robust vulnerability management program that includes continuous scanning, accurate risk assessment, prioritized remediation based on impact and exploitability, and regular reporting. The process should be iterative and adaptable to evolving threats and business needs, ensuring that security investments are aligned with overall business objectives and compliance requirements. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that organizations often struggle with ensuring data privacy compliance when transferring personal data to third-party service providers located in jurisdictions with differing data protection standards. A certified security analyst, CSA, is tasked with advising on a proposed data transfer of customer personal information from a UK-based company to a cloud service provider headquartered in a country that is not subject to an adequacy decision by the UK government. The data includes names, contact details, and purchase history. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with UK data protection regulations and ethical data handling practices? Option A. Proceed with the data transfer after obtaining a written assurance from the cloud service provider that they will adhere to their internal data security policies and will not share the data with unauthorized third parties. Option B. Implement standard contractual clauses, SCC, between the UK company and the cloud service provider, and conduct a transfer impact assessment, TIA, to evaluate the risks to the personal data in the recipient country, documenting any necessary supplementary measures. Option C. Rely on the fact that the data is not considered sensitive personal data under UK law and therefore does not require specific transfer mechanisms beyond a standard service agreement. Option D. Transfer the data after obtaining consent from each individual customer for their data to be transferred to the specified country without further assessment of the recipient's data protection capabilities. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the data transfer after obtaining a written assurance from the cloud service provider that they will adhere to their internal data security policies and will not share the data with unauthorized third parties. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified security analysts, CSA, in navigating the complexities of data privacy regulations when dealing with international data transfers. The professional challenge lies in balancing the operational need for data processing with the stringent legal and ethical obligations to protect personal data, especially when different regulatory regimes might apply. A CSA must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance, avoid significant legal penalties, and maintain stakeholder trust. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the data being transferred, the purpose of the transfer, and the recipient's data protection capabilities, followed by the implementation of appropriate safeguards. This aligns with the core principles of data protection frameworks like GDPR, which mandate that personal data transferred outside the EU/EEA must be subject to adequate protection. This adequate protection can be achieved through mechanisms such as standard contractual clauses, SCC, binding corporate rules, BCR, or by ensuring the recipient country has an adequacy decision. The ethical imperative is to uphold the fundamental right to privacy for individuals whose data is being processed. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the recipient's internal policies without verifying their legal adequacy or contractual commitments would fail to meet the extraterritorial obligations of data protection laws. This could lead to regulatory breaches, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which assumes that anonymized data is exempt from all data protection regulations without a proper assessment of re-identification risk, is also problematic. Many regulations, including GDPR, still consider pseudonymized data as personal data and require appropriate safeguards. Furthermore, ignoring the need for a data protection impact assessment (DPIA) for high-risk processing activities, such as large-scale international data transfers, is a significant regulatory failure. The professional decision-making process for CSAs in such situations should involve a risk-based approach. This includes understanding the specific data protection laws applicable to the data being handled, e.g., GDPR if EU data is involved, identifying the nature and sensitivity of the data, assessing the risks associated with the proposed data transfer, consulting legal counsel when necessary, and implementing documented controls and safeguards that are demonstrably compliant with relevant regulations. Prioritizing transparency with data subjects and ensuring accountability for data processing activities are also crucial ethical considerations. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential exfiltration of sensitive customer data. As a certified security analyst, CSA, operating under U.S. federal and state data privacy regulations, what is the most appropriate initial step to investigate this suspected incident using packet capture and analysis? Option A. Obtain documented authorization from the incident response lead and legal counsel, clearly defining the scope and duration of packet capture, and then proceed with targeted capture on suspected exfiltration pathways. Option B. Begin analyzing existing firewall logs for any unusual outbound connections without capturing live traffic. Option C. Immediately initiate a full network packet capture across all segments to identify any suspicious outbound traffic. Option D. Inform affected customers about the potential data exfiltration before commencing any investigation to ensure transparency. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a full network packet capture across all segments to identify any suspicious outbound traffic. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified security analyst, CSA, to balance the technical necessity of packet capture and analysis with strict data privacy regulations. CSA must ensure that their investigative actions are both effective in identifying security threats and compliant with legal and ethical obligations regarding the handling of sensitive information. The challenge lies in obtaining the necessary data for analysis without infringing on privacy rights or exceeding authorized scope. The correct approach involves a systematic and authorized process for packet capture and analysis. This begins with obtaining explicit, documented authorization from the appropriate authority, e.g., Incident Response Lead Legal Counsel, before initiating any capture. The capture should be narrowly scoped to the specific systems and timeframes relevant to the suspected incident, minimizing the collection of extraneous data. Analysis should then focus solely on identifying malicious activity or policy violations, and any personally identifiable information, PI, or sensitive data encountered must be handled with extreme care, anonymized, or redacted as per organizational policy and relevant regulations. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and lawful processing, which are fundamental to data protection regulations. For example, in a U.S. context, this would align with principles found in frameworks like NIST SB 800-53, which emphasizes authorized access and control of information, and the need to protect sensitive data. Ethically, it upholds the trust placed in the CSA to act responsibly. An incorrect approach would be to initiate a broad, indiscriminate packet capture across the entire network without specific authorization, hoping to stumble upon evidence. This fails to adhere to the principle of data minimization and could lead to the unauthorized collection of vast amounts of sensitive data, violating privacy regulations and potentially exposing the organization to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to analyze captured packets without proper authorization or a defined scope, potentially leading to the misuse or unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. This disregards the need for a controlled and authorized investigation process. Finally, failing to properly handle or redact sensitive information found within the captured packets, even if collected legitimately, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it directly compromises individual privacy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's incident response plan, relevant legal and regulatory frameworks, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or U.S. federal/state privacy laws, and ethical guidelines. Before any technical action, the CSA must confirm they have the necessary authorization and that the proposed actions are proportionate to the suspected threat. They should consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure all activities are lawful and ethically sound. The focus should always be on achieving the security objective, while minimizing the impact on privacy and adhering to the principle of least privilege in data access and handling. Question 5. Regulatory review indicates that a certified security analyst, CSA, is tasked with improving the security posture of a financial services organization. The analyst has identified a new type of malware that has been making headlines. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for addressing this emerging threat? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify specific organizational assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts related to the new malware, and then develop tailored mitigation strategies. Option B. Immediately deploy a widely recognized anti-malware solution that has proven effective against similar threats in other organizations. Option C. Implement security controls that specifically target the known technical indicators of the new malware. Based on public threat intelligence reports, Option D. Prioritize the implementation of security awareness training for all employees, focusing on the general risks of malware infections. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify specific organizational assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts related to the new malware, and then develop tailored mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the certified security analyst, CSA, to balance the immediate need for a security solution with the imperative to conduct a thorough and compliant risk assessment. Rushing to implement a solution without understanding the specific threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts to the organization's assets would be a significant professional failing, potentially leading to ineffective security controls, wasted resources, and non-compliance with regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed security measures are proportionate to the identified risks and align with the organization's overall security posture and legal obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic risk assessment process. This entails identifying critical assets, analyzing potential threats and vulnerabilities, evaluating the likelihood and impact of those threats exploiting vulnerabilities, and then determining appropriate risk treatment strategies. This methodical process ensures that security investments are prioritized based on actual risk, leading to more effective and efficient security controls. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, conducting a risk assessment is often a mandated requirement for demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to protecting sensitive information and systems. It forms the foundation for a robust security program, enabling informed decision-making and accountability. Implementing a security solution without a preceding risk assessment is a direct violation of professional standards and likely regulatory frameworks. This approach fails to establish a baseline understanding of the organization's risk landscape, meaning the chosen solution may not address the most critical threats or could be entirely unnecessary, leading to misallocation of resources. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence, as the analyst has not adequately investigated the problem before proposing a solution. Adopting a solution based solely on industry best practices without tailoring it to the specific organizational context is also problematic. While industry best practices provide valuable guidance, they are not a substitute for a specific risk assessment. Generic implementation might overlook unique vulnerabilities or threats present within the organization, or it might impose controls that are overly burdensome or ineffective for the specific environment. This can lead to compliance gaps and a false sense of security. Focusing on the most visible or recent security incidents as the sole driver for a solution, without a broader risk assessment, is reactive and incomplete. While recent incidents are important indicators, they may not represent the full spectrum of risks an organization faces. This approach can lead to a piecemeal security strategy that addresses symptoms rather than root causes, leaving other critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and organizational policies. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment to identify and prioritize risks. Only after a thorough understanding of the risks should security solutions be designed, implemented, and continuously monitored. This iterative process ensures that security measures are effective, efficient, and compliant. Question 6. Consider a scenario where a certified security analyst, CSA, is tasked with configuring a virtual private network, VPN, for a US-based financial services firm to enable secure remote access for its employees. The firm handles sensitive customer financial data and is subject to regulations like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, and the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS. The analyst must choose a VPN configuration that prioritizes data protection and regulatory compliance. Which of the following VPN configuration strategies best aligns with these requirements? Option A. Configure the VPN to use the older DES encryption algorithm and require only a username and password for authentication. Option B. Deploy a VPN that supports only PPTP protocol and allows all remote users to access the entire internal network segment. Option C. Utilize a VPN with strong encryption but disable MFA to simplify the login process for users. Option D. Implement a VPN using AES 256 encryption with SHA 256 hashing and enforce multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all remote user logins. The correct answer is D. Implement a VPN using AES 256 encryption with SHA 256 hashing and enforce multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all remote user logins. Explanation: This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity, balancing the need for secure remote access with the operational requirements of a business. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that VPN configurations not only meet technical security standards, but also comply with relevant regulatory frameworks and ethical obligations. A misconfiguration can lead to significant security breaches, data loss, and severe regulatory penalties. Careful judgment is required to select a VPN configuration that is both robust and practical. The correct approach involves implementing a VPN solution that utilizes strong, modern encryption protocols and robust authentication mechanisms, such as multi-factor authentication, MFA. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, which are fundamental to secure system design. From a regulatory perspective, particularly within the context of U.S. cybersecurity frameworks like NIST, strong encryption and authentication are explicitly recommended to protect sensitive data in transit and prevent unauthorized access. Ethically, organizations have a duty to protect customer and proprietary data, and robust VPN configurations are a key component of fulfilling this duty. An approach that relies on outdated encryption algorithms, such as older versions of SSL or weak cipher suites, is professionally unacceptable. This failure directly contravenes best practices and regulatory guidance that mandate the use of current, strong cryptographic standards to protect against known vulnerabilities. Using such outdated methods exposes data to decryption by attackers, leading to potential data breaches and noncompliance with data protection regulations. Another incorrect approach is to implement a VPN without any form of multi-factor authentication. This bypasses a critical security layer, making accounts vulnerable to compromise through stolen credentials. Regulatory frameworks increasingly emphasize MFA as a baseline security control for remote access. Failing to implement MFA not only weakens the security posture, but also demonstrates a disregard for established security best practices and regulatory expectations, increasing the risk of unauthorized access and data exfiltration. Finally, configuring a VPN with overly permissive access rights for all remote users is a significant professional failure. This violates the principle of least privilege, where users should only have access to the resources necessary for their job functions. Overly broad access increases the attack surface and the potential damage from a compromised account. Regulatory bodies often scrutinize access control mechanisms, and a lack of granular permissions can be a direct indicator of non-compliance and poor security governance. A professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a thorough risk assessment, understanding the specific data being protected and the regulatory requirements applicable to the organization. This should be followed by a review of current industry best practices and available technologies. Selecting a VPN solution should prioritize strong encryption, robust authentication, including MFA and granular access controls, ensuring that the chosen configuration meets both security objectives and regulatory obligations. Continuous monitoring and regular updates of VPN configurations are also crucial to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Question 7. The assessment process reveals a security incident involving sensitive customer information. The IT security team has identified the affected systems, but there is initial confusion regarding which business unit or individual holds ultimate accountability for this specific dataset. Considering the Certified Security Analyst, CSA, exams focus on regulatory compliance and roles. Which of the following actions best aligns with established security principles and potential regulatory requirements for data stewardship and incident response? Option A. The incident should be escalated directly to the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, for them to unilaterally determine the data owner and direct the response. Option B. The IT security team should immediately implement all necessary containment and eradication measures, assuming full responsibility for the data's security throughout the incident. Option C. The security officer should initiate a review of the organization's data classification policy and data governance framework to identify the business unit or individual designated as the data owner for this type of sensitive customer information. Option D. The IT department should be tasked with managing the entire incident response process, including communication with affected parties, as they are responsible for the infrastructure. Correct answer is B. The IT security team should immediately implement all necessary containment and eradication measures, assuming full responsibility for the data's security throughout the incident. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a common challenge in cybersecurity: the ambiguity of roles and responsibilities when a security incident impacts data managed by multiple departments. This scenario is professionally challenging because a delay in identifying the correct data owner can lead to significant compliance violations, reputational damage, and financial penalties. The urgency of incident response necessitates clear lines of accountability. Careful judgment is required to navigate organizational structures and regulatory mandates to ensure swift and effective action. The correct approach involves a systematic identification of the data owner based on the data's classification and the business function it supports, aligning with the principles of data governance and regulatory requirements for data stewardship. This approach is right because it directly addresses the core of data accountability. In many regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data protection e.g., GDPR if the jurisdiction were EU, or relevant U.S. state laws like CCPA if U.S., the data owner is ultimately responsible for the security and privacy of the data they own or are accountable for. This responsibility extends to ensuring appropriate security controls are in place and that incidents are handled according to established procedures. By correctly identifying the data owner, the organization ensures that the entity with the ultimate responsibility is engaged in the incident response, facilitating timely decision-making and remediation. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the IT department to manage all aspects of data security, regardless of ownership, fails to recognize the distributed nature of data and the specific responsibilities mandated by regulations. This approach is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it absolves business units of their accountability for the data they generate and use, potentially leading to inadequate security measures if IT's understanding of the data's context is incomplete. Another incorrect approach that involves escalating the incident to senior management without first identifying the data owner bypasses crucial steps in the incident response framework. This is a failure because it creates unnecessary bottlenecks and can lead to decisions being made by individuals who lack the detailed knowledge of the data and its associated risks. Regulatory frameworks often emphasize a structured incident response process that begins with containment and assessment, which is best achieved by engaging the responsible data owner early. Finally, an incorrect approach that delegates responsibility to the security officer to unilaterally decide the data owner is also problematic. While the security officer is responsible for the overall security posture, they are not typically designated as the ultimate owner of business data. This approach is a regulatory and ethical failure because it misaligns responsibility and accountability. Data ownership is a business function, and the security officer's role is to advise and enforce security policies, not to assume ownership of data belonging to other departments. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes clear role definition and adherence to established incident response plans. This involves understanding the organization's data governance policies, identifying key stakeholders, including data owners, data custodians, and security personnel, and having a documented process for incident escalation and data ownership determination. When faced with ambiguity, the professional approach is to consult internal policies and, if necessary, seek clarification from legal or compliance departments to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates that a critical vulnerability was identified in a web application that handles sensitive customer data. The security analyst is tasked with performing a comprehensive vulnerability scan to assess the extent of the exposure and identify any related weaknesses. The organization operates under U.S. federal regulations that mandate the protection of personally identifiable information, PI. Given the potential for disruption to the live production environment, what is the most appropriate course of action for the security analyst? Option A. Perform an immediate, broad, uncoordinated scan across all systems in the production environment to ensure complete coverage. Option B. Postpone the vulnerability scan until a scheduled maintenance window without implementing any interim compensating controls to avoid any potential risk of disruption. Option C. Conduct a phased, risk-based vulnerability scan, prioritizing critical assets and known high-risk vulnerabilities, and obtain explicit authorization for all scanning activities. Option D. Focus the scan exclusively on superficial, easily detectable vulnerabilities to minimize the time required and avoid impacting system performance. The correct answer is C. Conduct a phased, risk-based vulnerability scan, prioritizing critical assets and known high-risk vulnerabilities, and obtain explicit authorization for all scanning activities. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a common challenge in cybersecurity, balancing the need for comprehensive vulnerability assessment with the operational impact and potential risks of such activities. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the analyst to make a critical decision regarding the scope and methodology of a vulnerability scan, directly impacting the organization's security posture and its compliance with regulatory requirements. The pressure to deliver timely results while ensuring accuracy and minimizing disruption necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach involves conducting a phased, risk-based vulnerability scan, prioritizing critical assets and known high-risk vulnerabilities, and obtaining explicit authorization for all scanning activities. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with best practices in vulnerability management, which emphasize a structured and iterative process. From a regulatory perspective, particularly within a framework like the U.S. NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or specific regulations like HIPAA for healthcare data, demonstrating due diligence in identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities is paramount. Obtaining authorization ensures that the scanning activities are conducted within approved parameters, preventing accidental disruption of critical services, and adhering to organizational policies and potentially contractual obligations. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of false positives or negatives and ensures that remediation efforts are focused on the most impactful threats. An incorrect approach would be to perform a broad, uncoordinated scan across all systems without prior authorization or risk assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the potential for service disruption, which could have significant financial and operational consequences for the organization. Ethically and regulatorily, such an action could be seen as negligent, failing to exercise due care in managing IT assets. It also bypasses necessary change management processes, which are often mandated by compliance frameworks to ensure that activities are controlled and documented. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on superficial, easily detectable vulnerabilities without deeper analysis or consideration of the business context. This is flawed because it may lead to a false sense of security, failing to identify more sophisticated or deeply embedded vulnerabilities that pose a greater risk. Regulatory frameworks often require a comprehensive understanding of an organization's threat landscape, not just a surface-level scan. A third incorrect approach would be to delay the scan indefinitely due to fear of potential disruption, without implementing any interim compensating controls. This is professionally irresponsible, as it leaves the organization exposed to known or unknown threats for an extended period. Compliance mandates often require proactive security measures, and inaction in the face of known risks is a significant ethical and regulatory failing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's critical assets, the regulatory landscape it operates within, and its risk tolerance. A structured approach that includes threat modeling, asset criticality assessment, and phased scanning, coupled with robust communication and authorization protocols, is essential. Professionals must prioritize actions that provide the greatest security benefit while minimizing operational risk and ensuring compliance. Question 9. The analysis reveals that a new CCTV camera has been installed in a common break room area, and a security team member has requested access to the footage to review conversations that occurred during a recent informal team discussion, stating it might reveal insights into team dynamics. As a certified security analyst, CSA, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advise the security team member to informally ask colleagues about the discussion, as reviewing footage for non-security related insights is not the primary function of CCTV. Option B. Escalate the request to senior management for a decision, without providing any initial assessment of the request's validity. Option C. Deny the request, citing the need for a specific, legitimate security investigation and adherence to data protection principles regarding purpose limitation and privacy. Option D. Grant access to the footage, as the camera is already installed for security purposes, and the request is for a potentially beneficial insight into team dynamics. correct answer is C. Deny the request, citing the need for a specific, legitimate security investigation and adherence to data protection principles regarding purpose limitation and privacy. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an organization's security needs and an individual's right to privacy. As a certified security analyst, CSA, you are tasked with balancing these competing interests, particularly when surveillance systems like CCTV are involved. The ethical dilemma arises from the potential for misuse of collected data and the need for transparency and accountability in its deployment and operation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that surveillance measures are proportionate, necessary, and compliant with all applicable regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the organization's existing CCTV policy against the specific regulatory framework governing data protection and surveillance in the relevant jurisdiction. This includes understanding the legal basis for collecting and processing CCTV footage, the purpose limitation principle, ensuring data is collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, data minimization, collecting only what is necessary, and the rights of individuals whose data is being captured. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to these legal and ethical standards, ensuring that the surveillance system is deployed and managed in a manner that respects privacy and avoids unnecessary intrusion. This aligns with the principles of lawful and ethical data processing, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and avoiding legal repercussions. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the mere presence of CCTV cameras grants unrestricted access to all footage for any purpose. This fails to acknowledge the legal limitations and ethical considerations surrounding surveillance. For instance, accessing footage for personal curiosity or unrelated to a legitimate security investigation would violate the principle of purpose limitation and potentially infringe on privacy rights. Another incorrect approach would be to disregard the need for clear signage or notification to individuals that they are under surveillance. This lack of transparency can be a violation of data protection regulations, which often mandate informing individuals about the collection of their personal data. Furthermore, retaining footage for longer than necessary without a justifiable reason would contravene data minimization principles and increase the risk of data breaches. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the situation. This involves consulting relevant legislation and organizational policies. Next, assess the necessity and proportionality of the surveillance measure in question. Consider the legitimate security objective and whether less intrusive means could achieve the same outcome. Document all decisions and justifications thoroughly. If in doubt, seek legal counsel or consult with the organization's data protection officer. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and aligned with best practices in security and data privacy. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates that the firewall team is frequently pressured by business units to grant immediate access for critical applications. In response to these pressures, the team has adopted several informal practices for managing firewall rule changes. Which of the following approaches represents the most robust and compliant method for handling such requests, ensuring both operational continuity and adherence to security best practices and regulatory requirements? Option A. Implement temporary firewall rule changes based on verbal requests from business unit managers, with the understanding that these changes will be reviewed and made permanent or reverted after the immediate business need has passed. Option B. Permanently add firewall rules for any application deemed critical by a business unit, without requiring a formal review process to avoid future access disruptions. Option C. Require a formal, documented request for all firewall rule changes, including a clear business justification and a proposed duration for the change. This request must then undergo a risk assessment by the security team and receive approval from designated management before implementation. Option D. Allow senior network administrators to unilaterally approve and implement firewall rule changes based on their technical judgment, as they are most familiar with the network infrastructure and security implications. The correct answer is A. Implement temporary firewall rule changes based on verbal requests from business unit managers, with the understanding that these changes will be reviewed and made permanent or reverted after the immediate business need has passed. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for network access with the long-term security posture and compliance requirements. A certified security analyst must not only understand firewall technologies, but also their implications within a specific regulatory framework. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to hasty decisions that bypass established security protocols, potentially creating significant vulnerabilities and regulatory noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any temporary measures are documented, risk-assessed, and remediated promptly. The correct approach involves a structured, risk-based process for approving and implementing temporary firewall rule changes. This approach is best professional practice because it acknowledges the need for agility while maintaining control and accountability. Specifically, it mandates a documented request, a thorough risk assessment by security personnel, and approval from authorized management. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, ensuring that any deviation from standard policy is understood, justified, and temporary. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data protection and critical infrastructure, often require organizations to maintain auditable records of security changes and to implement controls that prevent unauthorized access. This approach provides that audit trail and demonstrates due diligence in managing security risks. Proving a firewall rule change without a documented request and risk assessment is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses essential security controls and creates an immediate, unmanaged risk. This lack of documentation makes it impossible to track who made the change, why it was made, and what its potential impact is, violating principles of accountability and auditability. It also fails to adhere to the principle of least privilege, potentially opening up the network to unauthorized access. Implementing a permanent firewall rule change to accommodate a temporary business need without a formal change management process and subsequent review is professionally unacceptable. This approach introduces permanent vulnerabilities that may no longer be necessary, increasing the attack surface unnecessarily. It also undermines the integrity of the firewall policy and the change management process, which are critical for maintaining a secure and compliant environment. Allowing a network administrator to unilaterally approve and implement firewall rule changes based on their technical expertise alone is professionally unacceptable. While technical expertise is valuable, it does not negate the need for a formal governance process. This approach lacks oversight, accountability, and a proper risk assessment, potentially leading to decisions that prioritize convenience over security or compliance. It also fails to involve stakeholders who may have a broader understanding of the business impact and regulatory implications of such changes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a documented, risk-managed approach to all security changes. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements, establishing clear change management policies and procedures, conducting thorough risk assessments for any proposed deviations, obtaining appropriate approvals, and ensuring that all changes are logged and auditable. When faced with urgent requests, the framework should include provisions for emergency changes, but these must still be documented, risk assessed, and followed up with a formal review and remediation process. Question 11. To address the challenge of effectively identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing security risks within a U.S.-regulated financial institution, which risk assessment approach best aligns with regulatory expectations for comprehensive due diligence and informed decision-making? Option A. A purely quantitative approach that assigns precise numerical probabilities and financial loss figures to all identified risks, regardless of data availability or inherent uncertainty. Option B. A technical vulnerability-focused approach that prioritizes risks based solely on the severity of identified technical flaws and their exploitability. Option C. A purely qualitative approach that categorizes risks into broad levels such as low, medium, and high based on expert judgment and descriptive analysis. Option D. A hybrid approach that combines qualitative descriptions of risk likelihood and impact with quantitative measures, where feasible, allowing for a nuanced understanding of potential threats and their business consequences. The correct answer is D. A hybrid approach that combines qualitative descriptions of risk likelihood and impact with quantitative measures where feasible, allowing for a nuanced understanding of potential threats and their business consequences. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified security analyst, CSA, to move beyond a superficial understanding of risk to a practical, defensible methodology that aligns with regulatory expectations. The challenge lies in selecting an approach that not only identifies potential threats and vulnerabilities, but also quantifies their potential impact in a way that informs resource allocation and strategic decision-making, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing the CSA's practice. Careful judgment is required to ensure the chosen risk assessment method is both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a hybrid methodology that combines qualitative and quantitative elements. This approach is best professional practice because it acknowledges that while some risks can be assigned numerical values, quantitative, others are more subjective and best described through descriptive scales, qualitative. This balanced perspective allows for a more comprehensive understanding of the risk landscape, specifically within the U.S. regulatory framework. This aligns with the principles of NIST SB 800-30, which advocates for a risk assessment process that considers both the likelihood and impact of threats, often using a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures to inform risk levels and prioritize mitigation efforts. This approach is ethically sound, as it promotes a thorough and objective evaluation, leading to more informed and justifiable security investments. An approach that relies solely on qualitative assessments, while useful for initial identification, fails to provide the granular data needed for effective prioritization and resource allocation, which is often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory guidance that mandates demonstrable due diligence in security program management. This can lead to misallocation of resources and an inability to justify security expenditures to stakeholders or auditors. An approach that attempts to apply purely quantitative metrics to all risks, without considering the inherent subjectivity and difficulty in assigning precise numerical values to certain intangible assets or complex threat scenarios, can lead to an illusion of accuracy. This can result in flawed decision-making based on potentially unreliable data, and may not satisfy regulatory requirements for a comprehensive risk assessment that accounts for all relevant factors, including those that are difficult to quantify. An approach that focuses only on technical vulnerabilities without considering the business impact or the likelihood of exploitation is incomplete. Regulatory frameworks often require an understanding of how security incidents could affect business operations, reputation, and compliance, not just the technical flaws. This narrow focus can lead to overlooking significant risks that are not purely technical in nature. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory and compliance landscape applicable to the organization. 2. Identifying the organization's critical assets and business processes. 3. Selecting a risk assessment methodology that is appropriate for the organization's context, size, and the nature of its operations, ensuring it can address both tangible and intangible risks. 4. Ensuring the chosen methodology allows for clear communication of risk levels to stakeholders, facilitating informed decision-making. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment process to reflect changes in the threat landscape, business environment, and regulatory requirements. Question 12. The review process indicates that while the organization has developed comprehensive security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines, there is a noticeable gap in their practical application across various departments. Which of the following approaches best addresses this gap and ensures effective implementation? Option A. Distribute the updated security documentation to all employees via email with a mandatory acknowledgement of receipt, assuming that reading the documents is sufficient for understanding and compliance. Option B. Conduct a series of targeted workshops with representatives from each department to gather feedback on the existing documentation, refine it based on their operational realities, and then roll out role-specific training modules that explain the rationale and practical application of the security controls. Option C. Implement a new, complex security tool that automatically enforces most security policies, reducing the need for extensive employee training or procedural adherence. Option D. Schedule a single, organization-wide training session led by the IT security team, covering all aspects of the security documentation in a general overview. The correct answer is B. Conduct a series of targeted workshops with representatives from each department to gather feedback on the existing documentation, refine it based on their operational realities, and then roll out role-specific training modules that explain the rationale and practical application of the security controls. Explanation. The review process indicates a common challenge in cybersecurity, ensuring that documented policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines are not only comprehensive, but also effectively communicated and understood by all relevant stakeholders. The professional challenge lies in bridging the gap between theoretical documentation and practical implementation, especially when different departments have varying levels of technical expertise and operational priorities. This requires careful judgment to select an approach that fosters buy-in and adherence across the organization. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes stakeholder engagement and tailored communication. This means actively involving key personnel from different departments in the review and refinement of security documentation. By soliciting feedback and addressing concerns, the organization builds a sense of ownership and ensures that the policies are practical and relevant to their specific roles. Furthermore, providing role-specific training and awareness programs reinforces understanding and promotes consistent application of security measures. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, which emphasize the importance of clear communication and accountability in maintaining an effective security posture. Regulatory frameworks often mandate that organizations establish and maintain appropriate security policies and procedures, and this approach directly supports compliance by ensuring these are understood and actionable. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a top-down dissemination of documentation without seeking input or providing tailored support. This often leads to policies being perceived as bureaucratic hurdles rather than essential safeguards. Without understanding the rationale or practical implications, employees are less likely to adhere to them, creating significant security gaps. This failure to engage stakeholders and provide adequate training can result in non-compliance with regulatory requirements that expect demonstrable efforts to embed security practices within the organization's culture. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a single, generic training session is sufficient for all employees. This overlooks the diverse needs and responsibilities within an organization. Security risks and the required controls can vary significantly between, for example, the IT department and the marketing department. A one-size-fits-all training program will likely be too technical for some and too basic for others, leading to disengagement and ineffective knowledge transfer. This can result in critical security protocols being misunderstood or ignored, increasing the organization's vulnerability. A third incorrect approach would be to update policies and procedures without a formal communication plan or a mechanism for feedback. This can lead to confusion and frustration among employees who are unaware of the changes or how they impact their daily tasks. Without clear communication and an avenue for questions, employees may revert to old habits or implement new procedures incorrectly, undermining the intended security improvements. This lack of structured communication and feedback loop is a direct contravention of best practices in change management and can lead to systemic security weaknesses. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of assessment, engagement, implementation, and reinforcement. First, assess the current state of security documentation and stakeholder understanding. Second, actively engage relevant stakeholders to gather feedback and ensure buy-in. Third, implement policies and procedures with clear communication and tailored training. Finally, establish mechanisms for ongoing reinforcement, feedback, and periodic review to adapt to evolving threats and organizational changes. Question 13. What factors determine the immediate actions a certified security analyst should take upon discovering a critical network vulnerability that could lead to a significant data breach, considering regulatory compliance and potential for exploitation? Option A. The primary focus should be on immediately reporting the vulnerability to external cybersecurity agencies and law enforcement before any internal containment or assessment is performed. Option B. The immediate priority is to contain the vulnerability, document the discovery and mitigation steps, and initiate the organization's formal incident response and reporting procedures as dictated by relevant regulatory frameworks. Option C. The CSA should attempt to fix the vulnerability discreetly without involving management or initiating formal incident response, as long as the fix is successful. Option D. The CSA should assess the perceived likelihood of exploitation and only initiate formal response procedures if the risk is deemed high enough to warrant immediate attention. correct answer is B. The immediate priority is to contain the vulnerability, document the discovery and mitigation steps, and initiate the organization's formal incident response and reporting procedures as dictated by relevant regulatory frameworks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified security analysts, CSA, where a critical network vulnerability is discovered. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to protect the organization's assets and data with the regulatory obligations and potential impact of disclosing the vulnerability. The CSA must make a judgment call that adheres to legal frameworks, ethical standards, and organizational policy, all while considering the potential for exploitation by malicious actors. The pressure to act quickly without compromising compliance or causing undue panic necessitates a structured and informed decision-making process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes immediate containment and mitigation, while simultaneously initiating a formal incident response and reporting process. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of responsible disclosure and incident management, which are often mandated or strongly recommended by regulatory frameworks governing data security and breach notification. Specifically, it acknowledges the need to 1. Secure the network to prevent exploitation, 2. Document the vulnerability and the steps taken, and 3. Follow established protocols for reporting to relevant authorities and stakeholders as required by law. This methodical process ensures that the organization acts in a compliant and responsible manner, minimizing both the security risk and the legal ramifications. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to immediately contain the vulnerability and instead focusing solely on external reporting is an incorrect approach because it leaves the organization exposed to immediate attack. This directly violates the CSA's duty to protect organizational assets and could lead to a significant data breach, triggering severe regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to fix the vulnerability without any documentation or formal reporting. This is problematic because it bypasses established incident response procedures, which are often legally required. Without proper documentation, the organization cannot demonstrate due diligence or compliance if audited, and it may fail to meet mandatory breach notification requirements. Finally, deciding to ignore the vulnerability due to perceived low risk or lack of immediate impact is a grave ethical and regulatory failure. Organizations have a legal and ethical obligation to identify and address security risks. Ignoring a known vulnerability demonstrates a lack of due care and can result in severe penalties if a breach subsequently occurs. It also undermines the trust placed in the CSA to proactively safeguard the organization. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured incident response plan. This typically involves 1. Identification and assessment, confirming the vulnerability and its potential impact. 2. Containment, taking immediate steps to isolate or mitigate the vulnerability. 3. Eradication, removing the threat. 4. Recovery, restoring systems to normal operation. 5. Lessons learned, reviewing the incident to improve future security posture. Crucially, throughout this process, adherence to relevant regulatory frameworks, e.g., data protection laws, industry-specific regulations, regarding notification and reporting must be paramount. This involves understanding reporting timelines, thresholds for notification, and the specific authorities to inform. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive evaluation of authentication methods to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and to safeguard sensitive customer information. An organization is considering its options for securing access to its customer relationship management (CRM) system, which contains personally identifiable information (PI). Which authentication approach would best satisfy both regulatory mandates and robust security principles for this scenario? Option A. Mandating the use of complex passwords that are changed every 90 days with no additional authentication factors. Option B. Implementing multi-factor authentication (MFA), requiring a password, a one-time code sent to a registered mobile device, and a fingerprint scan. Option C. Requiring users to authenticate solely with a fingerprint scan for all CRM system access. Option D. Utilizing a password combined with answers to 3 security questions about the user's personal history. The correct answer is B. Implementing multi-factor authentication (MFA), requiring a password, a one-time code sent to a registered mobile device, and a fingerprint scan. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity, balancing robust security with user experience and operational efficiency. The professional challenge lies in selecting an authentication method that meets stringent regulatory compliance requirements, while also being practical for a diverse user base and the organization's technical infrastructure. The need for deep analysis stems from the potential for significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust if compliance is not met or if the chosen method hinders legitimate access. Correct approach analysis. Implementing multi-factor authentication, MFA, is the correct approach. This method significantly enhances security by requiring users to provide 2 or more verification factors to gain access to a resource. These factors typically fall into 3 categories: something the user knows, e.g., password; something the user has, e.g., a token or smartphone; and something the user is, e.g., fingerprint or facial scan. From a regulatory perspective, many frameworks, including those relevant to financial services and data protection, mandate or strongly recommend MFA for sensitive systems and data access. This aligns with the principle of defense in depth, a cornerstone of modern security practices. The ethical justification is the organization's duty to protect sensitive data and user privacy from unauthorized access. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on passwords, even strong ones, is an insufficient approach. Passwords are vulnerable to various attacks, including brute force, phishing, and credential stuffing. Many regulatory frameworks explicitly state that single-factor authentication, like passwords alone, is inadequate for protecting sensitive information. Ethically, this approach demonstrates a failure to implement reasonable security measures, potentially exposing users and the organization to harm. Implementing only biometric authentication presents a different set of challenges. Biometrics offer a convenient something you are factor. They are not infallible. Biometric data can be spoofed, and there are privacy concerns associated with storing and managing such sensitive personal information. Furthermore, regulatory bodies often require a combination of factors, not just a single biometric. Relying solely on biometrics may not meet the spirit or letter of regulations that emphasize layered security. Using a combination of password and a security question is also an inadequate approach. Security questions are often easily guessable or discoverable through social engineering, making them a weak second factor. This approach falls short of the robust, multi-layered security typically mandated by regulations for protecting critical assets and data. It fails to provide the necessary assurance against sophisticated attacks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach authentication method selection by first understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to their organization and the data they handle. This involves identifying the minimum security standards and best practices mandated by relevant laws and guidelines. Next, they should conduct a risk assessment to understand the threats and vulnerabilities associated with different authentication methods. User experience and operational feasibility are also critical considerations, but they should not supersede regulatory compliance and security effectiveness. The decision-making process should involve a layered approach, prioritizing methods that offer the strongest assurance against unauthorized access while remaining practical. Continuous review and adaptation of authentication strategies are also essential as threats evolve and regulations are updated. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that the financial institution's current access control system is ad hoc, leading to frequent security incidents and audit findings related to unauthorized data access. The Certified Security Analyst, CSA, regulatory framework mandates strict adherence to the principle of least privilege and requires auditable access logs. Which authorization model implementation would best address these challenges while ensuring compliance with CSA guidelines? Option A. Implement an attribute-based access control, a back model with dynamic policy enforcement based on user and resource attributes. Option B. Implement a role-based access control, RBAC, model where permissions are grouped into roles aligned with job functions. Option C. Implement a discretionary access control, DAC, model, allowing resource owners to grant access individually. Option D. Implement a mandatory access control, MAC, model with strict security labels assigned by a central security authority. The correct answer is B. Implement a role-based access control, RBAC, model where permissions are grouped into roles aligned with job functions. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in cybersecurity, balancing granular access control with operational efficiency and regulatory compliance. The professional challenge lies in selecting an authorization model that not only meets the immediate security needs of a sensitive financial institution, but also aligns with the stringent data protection and access control mandates of the Certified Security Analyst (CSA) regulatory framework. The need for a robust, auditable, and scalable solution that minimizes the risk of unauthorized access or data breaches is paramount. The correct approach involves implementing a role-based access control (RBAC) model. This model is professionally sound because it simplifies access management by grouping permissions into roles that reflect job functions. For instance, a financial analyst role would have specific permissions to view and edit financial reports, while a read-only auditor role would only have permissions to view data. This aligns with CSA guidelines that emphasize the principle of least privilege, ensuring users only have access to the resources necessary for their job functions. RBAC provides a clear, auditable trail of who has access to what, which is critical for compliance and incident response. It is also scalable and easier to manage than granting permissions individually. An incorrect approach would be to implement a purely discretionary access control (DAC) model. This is professionally unacceptable because DAC, where the owner of a resource determines who can access it, can lead to inconsistent security policies and a lack of centralized control. In a regulated environment like a financial institution, this ad hoc permission granting can easily result in overprivileging users, creating significant compliance risks and audit failures under CSA regulations that mandate clear accountability and defined access policies. Another incorrect approach would be to implement an attribute-based access control, a BAC model, without a clear strategy for managing the attributes. While a BAC offers the highest granularity, its complexity can be a significant implementation challenge. If attributes are not consistently defined, updated, or enforced across the organization, it can lead to unintended access grants or denials, undermining security and compliance. The CSA framework emphasizes auditable and predictable access controls, which can be compromised by poorly managed ABAC implementations, making it a less suitable choice for an initial implementation in a highly regulated environment compared to the more structured RBAC. The professional reasoning process for making this decision should involve a thorough assessment of the organization's current security posture, operational workflows, and specific regulatory requirements. This includes understanding the principle of least privilege, the need for auditability, and the scalability of the chosen model. A risk-based approach, prioritizing models that offer strong security guarantees with manageable complexity, is essential. Evaluating the ease of implementation, ongoing maintenance, and the potential for human error in each model is also critical. Ultimately, the decision should be driven by the ability of the authorization model to demonstrably meet compliance obligations and effectively protect sensitive data. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that the Security Awareness Training Program has achieved a 98% completion rate among employees, with 75% of participants reporting that they found the training useful in a post-training survey. However, the number of reported security incidents has remained largely unchanged over the past year. Which of the following approaches would best demonstrate the actual impact of the Security Awareness Training Program on the organization's security posture? Option A. Track the number of security-related questions employees submit to the IT help desk following training sessions. Option B. Focus on the high completion rates and positive employee feedback as evidence of the training's success. Option C. Analyze the trend of security incidents over the past year, correlating any observed decreases with the implementation periods of specific training modules. Option D. Collect and analyze qualitative feedback from employees regarding their perceived understanding of security risks. The correct answer is C. Analyze the trend of security incidents over the past year, correlating any observed decreases with the implementation periods of specific training modules. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified security analyst, CSA, to balance the need for comprehensive security awareness training with the practical constraints of budget and employee time, while ensuring compliance with relevant regulations. The CSA must demonstrate the effectiveness of their training program through measurable impact, which can be difficult to quantify directly. Careful judgment is required to select an evaluation methodology that is both robust and feasible. The correct approach involves measuring the reduction in security incidents directly attributable to the training program. This is the most effective way to demonstrate the value and impact of security awareness initiatives. It aligns with the principle of demonstrating due diligence and the effectiveness of security controls, which is often a requirement under various regulatory frameworks that mandate risk management and incident prevention. By focusing on incident reduction, the CSA provides tangible evidence that the training is achieving its primary objective: to improve the organization's security posture. An approach that focuses solely on employee completion rates of training modules is insufficient. While completion is a necessary first step, it does not guarantee that employees have understood or internalized the security principles taught. This failure to assess actual knowledge retention or behavioral change means the organization cannot be assured that the training is effectively mitigating risks, potentially leading to non-compliance with regulations that require demonstrable security awareness. An approach that relies on anecdotal feedback from employees, while useful for identifying areas of improvement, lacks the rigor required for a formal impact assessment. Anecdotal evidence is subjective and cannot reliably demonstrate a reduction in security incidents or a measurable improvement in security posture. This approach fails to provide the objective data needed to justify the training investment and demonstrate compliance with regulatory expectations for effective security controls. An approach that measures the number of security-related questions employees ask after training is also not a direct measure of impact. An increase in questions could indicate confusion or a lack of understanding, rather than improved awareness leading to better security practices. It does not directly correlate to a reduction in actual security incidents, which is the ultimate goal of security awareness training. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes measurable outcomes aligned with organizational security objectives and regulatory requirements. This involves defining clear, quantifiable metrics for success before implementing training programs. The evaluation methodology should then be designed to collect data that directly supports these metrics. When faced with resource constraints, the focus should remain on demonstrating the effectiveness of the training in reducing risk and preventing incidents, rather than simply tracking participation or superficial engagement. This ensures that security investments are justified and that the organization is meeting its compliance obligations. Question 17. The evaluation methodology shows that while the principle of least privilege is a stated objective, the current implementation strategy relies on a broad, one-time access grant followed by infrequent manual reviews. This approach has led to a significant number of users possessing elevated privileges beyond their immediate job requirements. Considering the regulatory framework for financial institutions, which of the following implementation strategies best addresses the identified deficiencies while ensuring compliance and operational continuity? Option A. Rely on the existing manual review process, but increase the frequency of these reviews to quarterly, without implementing any automated provisioning or deprovisioning. Option B. Implement a phased rollout of least privilege, beginning with the most critical systems and sensitive data, incorporating automated access provisioning and deprovisioning, and establishing a schedule for regular, automated access reviews. Option C. Immediately revoke all non-essential access for all users across the organization to enforce the principle of least privilege with immediate effect. Option D. Focus solely on enhancing the technical controls for access management without engaging business unit leaders or end users in the policy definition process. The correct answer is B. Implement a phased rollout of least privilege, beginning with the most critical systems and sensitive data, incorporating automated access provisioning and deprovisioning, and establishing a schedule for regular, automated access reviews. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical gap in the implementation of the principle of least privilege within a financial institution's IT infrastructure. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security analyst to balance operational efficiency with robust security controls, all while adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The potential for unauthorized access, data breaches, and subsequent financial and reputational damage necessitates a precise and compliant approach. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based rollout of least privilege, starting with critical systems and sensitive data, and incorporating regular access reviews and automated provisioning/deprovisioning processes. This aligns with the principles of data protection and access control mandated by financial regulations, which emphasize minimizing exposure to sensitive information. Specifically, it addresses the need for granular control over who can access what, when, and why, thereby reducing the attack surface. This method ensures that security is not a bottleneck, but an integrated part of the operational workflow, supported by continuous monitoring and auditing. An incorrect approach of immediately revoking all non-essential access without a clear transition plan would lead to significant operational disruption, impacting legitimate business functions and potentially violating service-level agreements. This haste fails to consider the practical implications and could create a perception of security over functionality, leading to user workarounds that bypass intended controls. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical implementation without involving business unit stakeholders, risks creating access policies that are misaligned with actual job requirements, leading to inefficiencies and potential compliance issues if access is granted inappropriately. Furthermore, implementing least privilege without a robust auditing and review mechanism, such as relying on manual, infrequent reviews, fails to provide the continuous assurance required by regulatory frameworks, leaving the organization vulnerable to privilege creep and undetected misuse of access. Professionals should approach such implementation challenges by first conducting a thorough risk assessment and business impact analysis. This should be followed by a phased implementation strategy, prioritizing high-risk areas. Crucially, engagement with business unit leaders and end users is essential to ensure that access controls are practical and effective. Establishing clear policies, procedures, and automated tools for access management, coupled with regular audits and reviews, forms the bedrock of a sustainable and compliant least privilege implementation. Question 18. Compliance review shows that the organization's wireless networks are currently secured using a mix of WEP, WPA, and WPA2 protocols. Given the known vulnerabilities of WEP and the evolving threat landscape, what is the most appropriate and professionally responsible approach to enhance the wireless security posture? Option A. Implement a phased migration strategy, prioritizing the adoption of WPA3 on critical network segments and for new deployments, while upgrading other segments to WPA2 with strong security configurations and planning for the eventual decommissioning of WEP. Option B. Maintain WPA2 encryption across all wireless networks indefinitely, as it is considered sufficiently secure for current operational needs and avoids the complexity of further upgrades. Option C. Mandate a universal upgrade to WPA3 for all wireless access points and client devices within a strict 30-day timeframe, without regard for potential compatibility issues or operational disruption. Option D. Immediately enforce WEP encryption across all wireless networks to ensure maximum compatibility with all existing devices, regardless of security implications. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased migration strategy, prioritizing the adoption of WPA3 on critical network segments and for new deployments, while upgrading other segments to WPA2 with strong security configurations and planning for the eventual decommissioning of WEP. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security analyst to balance the immediate need for network functionality with the long-term security posture and regulatory compliance. The organization's reliance on legacy systems and the potential disruption of upgrading wireless security protocols necessitate a careful, phased approach rather than a hasty blanket change. The analyst must consider not only technical vulnerabilities, but also the operational impact and the organization's adherence to relevant security standards. The correct approach involves a phased migration strategy, prioritizing the most critical systems for WPA3 adoption, while implementing WPA2 with robust security configurations for others, and planning for the eventual deprecation of WEP. This is the best professional practice because it acknowledges the inherent risks of outdated protocols like WEP, which is known to have critical vulnerabilities. It also aligns with the principle of defense in depth and continuous improvement in security. By prioritizing WPA3, the organization adopts the most secure available standard, offering enhanced encryption and authentication. For systems that cannot immediately support WPA3, implementing WPA2 with strong pre-shared keys or enterprise authentication e.g. Radius provides a significant security uplift over WEP. This phased approach minimizes operational disruption while systematically reducing the attack surface. Implementing WEP across all wireless networks is professionally unacceptable due to its well-documented and easily exploitable security flaws. This directly violates the principle of maintaining a secure network environment and exposes the organization to significant data breaches and compliance violations. Adopting WPA3 universally without considering legacy device compatibility, leading to widespread network outages and operational paralysis, is also professionally unsound. While aiming for the highest security is commendable, it must be balanced with operational realities. This approach fails to account for the practical implications of a rapid, disruptive upgrade, potentially causing more harm than good by rendering critical systems inaccessible. Focusing solely on WPA2 for all networks, without a plan to migrate to WPA3, represents a missed opportunity to adopt the latest security advancements. While WPA2 is more secure than WEP, it is susceptible to certain attacks that WPA3 mitigates. A responsible security strategy involves staying current with evolving threats and protocols, and a static reliance on WPA2 without a forward-looking plan is a failure to proactively enhance security. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment of current wireless security protocols, an inventory of all network-connected devices and their compatibility with newer protocols, and an understanding of the organization's specific regulatory and compliance obligations. This should be followed by developing a phased migration plan that prioritizes critical assets, considers operational impact, and includes clear timelines for upgrading or replacing incompatible devices. Regular security audits and vulnerability assessments should be conducted throughout the migration process to ensure effectiveness. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that the organization needs to develop a robust business continuity plan, BCP, to address potential disruptions. Considering the Certified Security Analyst, CSA regulatory framework, which stakeholder groups' input is most critical to ensure the BCP effectively supports business objectives and regulatory compliance. Option A. External business continuity consultants. Option B. The IT department's technical recovery specialists. Option C. The compliance department's audit team. Option D. Senior management and key business unit leaders. The correct answer is D. Senior management and key business unit leaders. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational recovery with the long-term strategic implications of business continuity planning, BCP, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework for the Certified Security Analyst, CSA exam. The challenge lies in identifying the most critical stakeholder group whose input is paramount for effective BCP development, ensuring that the plan aligns with business objectives and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing the input of senior management and key business unit leaders. This is because they possess the strategic vision, understand the organization's risk appetite, and have the authority to allocate resources necessary for BCP implementation and maintenance. Their involvement ensures that the BCP is aligned with overall business objectives, regulatory requirements, and the organization's ability to withstand disruptive events. From a regulatory perspective, frameworks often mandate that BCPs be integrated with business strategy and approved by senior leadership to ensure accountability and effectiveness. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the IT department's perspective. While IT is crucial for technical recovery, their focus may be too narrow, potentially overlooking critical business processes, human resources, or supply chain dependencies that are outside their direct purview. This could lead to a technically sound but operationally insufficient plan. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the input of external consultants without sufficient internal stakeholder engagement. While consultants bring expertise, the BCP must be owned and understood by the organization's internal stakeholders to be truly effective and sustainable. Relying solely on external advice without deep internal buy-in can lead to a plan that is difficult to implement or maintain. Finally, Focusing solely on compliance checklists without understanding the underlying business impact is also an incorrect approach. While compliance is essential, a BCP's primary purpose is to ensure business resilience, not just to tick boxes. A plan that meets compliance requirements but doesn't adequately address critical business functions will fail during a real disruption. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the organization's strategic goals and regulatory obligations. This is followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders, assessing their roles and influence in business continuity, and then prioritizing their input based on their ability to shape and resource the BCP. Regular communication and validation with senior management are critical throughout the BCP lifecycle. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing comprehensive API security measures, including robust authentication, authorization, input validation, and rate limiting, incurs upfront development costs and potentially slows down initial deployment timelines. However, the potential costs of a data breach, regulatory fines, and reputational damage associated with insecure APIs are significantly higher. Considering the Certified Security Analyst (CSA) regulatory framework, which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of proactive risk management and data protection? Option A. Implement basic authentication and rely on application-level logic for authorization, deferring more advanced security controls to a later phase after initial deployment. Option B. Integrate comprehensive API security best practices, including strong authentication, granular authorization, thorough input validation, and rate limiting, as an integral part of the API development lifecycle. Option C. Prioritize rapid deployment by skipping detailed input validation and assuming client applications will send clean data, addressing any security issues discovered post-launch. Option D. Focus solely on encrypting data in transit and at rest, considering this sufficient protection for API endpoints and the data they access. Correct answer is A. Implement basic authentication and rely on application-level logic for authorization, deferring more advanced security controls to a later phase after initial deployment. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for rapid API development and deployment with the long-term security posture and regulatory compliance of the organization. The pressure to deliver features quickly can often lead to shortcuts in security, which, if not managed, can result in significant data breaches, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure that security is not an afterthought but an integral part of the API development lifecycle. The correct approach involves implementing robust API security best practices from the outset, including strong authentication and authorization mechanisms, input validation, rate limiting, and comprehensive logging. This proactive stance is crucial for meeting the regulatory requirements of the Certified Security Analyst (CSA) framework, which emphasizes the protection of sensitive data and the prevention of unauthorized access. By embedding security controls early, organizations can significantly reduce the attack surface and mitigate risks, aligning with the CSA's mandate to maintain secure information system. Implementing API security best practices is not merely a technical consideration, but a regulatory and ethical imperative. The CSA framework, like many regulatory regimes, places a strong emphasis on due diligence in protecting data. Failing to implement these practices can lead to regulatory violations, fines, and loss of customer trust. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of deployment over security, such as relying solely on basic authentication, without implementing granular authorization checks. This creates a significant vulnerability, as any authenticated user could potentially access or manipulate data they are not authorized to interact with, directly contravening the principles of least privilege and data protection mandated by security regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to neglect input validation, allowing malformed or malicious data to be passed to the API. This opens the door to injection attacks, e.g., SQL injection, command injection, which can compromise the integrity and confidentiality of the underlying data stores. Such oversights represent a failure to implement reasonable security measures, which is a common basis for regulatory noncompliance. Furthermore, a failure to implement rate limiting can lead to denial of service, DoS, attacks or brute force attempts against authentication mechanisms. This exposes the API to disruption and potential compromise, demonstrating a lack of foresight in protecting critical system availability and integrity, which are core tenets of security best practices and regulatory expectations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based approach. Security analysts must actively participate in the API development lifecycle, advocating for the integration of security controls at each stage. This includes conducting threat modeling, performing security testing, e.g., penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, and ensuring that APIs adhere to established security standards and regulatory requirements. The goal is to achieve a balance between innovation and security, ensuring that the organization's digital assets are protected without unduly hindering business objectives.